Hello, everyone, and welcome to 2022's Smarter Together webinar and the start of a new year. Happy New Year to everyone. It's delighted to be here and continue our work around Smarter Together, really based on all the wonderful multidisciplinary research that's anchored with communities for community impact and co-creation. And what a wonderful way to kick off then on our Albany project. This was one of our inaugural Georgia Smart Communities that we had a few years back, and it's actually been wonderful to see how it's progressed continuously, especially with ESRI support as it evolved and expanded. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce obviously the panelists and the team that's behind the Albany Housing and Food Security Project, but a couple of housekeeping. Please feel free to use the chat box for any questions or comments that you may have. We'll have time at the end of the day or at the end of the panel to answer any questions and facilitate the discussion. This is recorded, so if you want to follow us again later, feel free to reference this. And without further ado, let me introduce to you Stephen Carter. Stephen Carter started as the CIO of the city of Albany in Georgia when he was with us on this project, and since has been promoted to the city managers to be the city manager of City of Albany and has continued with this project. So let me have Stephen kick off with this project and then obviously welcome the rest of the panelists.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Deborah, for that introduction. And yes, we are one of the very first classes with the Georgia Smart Cities project, Georgia Tech Smart Cities project. I think it was 2018, seemed like such a long time ago now, but we've still been working on this project and it's still alive and well in Albany. The original name of the project was the Albany Housing Data Analytics and Visualization Initiative. That's a lot to say, but really what it all boiled down to is compiling a lot of data about our housing stock and then all of the things that surround that housing so that we can start making some good analytical decisions based on that data. You know, the initiative was aided in understanding, it was designed to aid in understanding the impact of public housing funds on our community. It has allowed us to validate economic returns using data analytics and visualization tools. A lot of those tools are through the ESRI products. We are an ESRI shop. We have the staff on hand that uses that product each and every day. So that wasn't a stretch for us to get into that. But Andrew Turner and his team, they've been tremendous help for us moving these initiatives along. We actually started with our Department of Community and Economic Development. That is the group that really is kind of in control of the housing stock here in Albany. And all of their data previously was on paper. Pretty much everything that they did was paper driven. And the real crux of this project was to try and get all of that paper and all of that data that they had from all the different systems that they were using to get it in a usable form so that they could actually see and utilize that data in a meaningful way. We have since grown from that. You know, that when we applied for the initial Smart Cities grant, the data analytics piece of this was never designed to be just a standalone project. We do that one time and then it dies. The vision for that is that it will continually evolve and outlive all of us and still be productive, a productive tool for our citizens and our city. We've launched a few other initiatives since that time. One that I talked to you a little bit about this morning is a food security initiative. You know, we first started talking about the housing, and I think there's a lot of data that we pulled in about the housing as far as some amenities around the utility data. I think Dr. Omar Asensio and his team They did a lot of work for us, scrubbing that data about utility usage and how it affects the housing market here in Albany. But another part of that housing is food insecurity. There are things that we describe as food deserts. And what we did with that, the food security initiative was a collaborative effort between our emerging technologies team, and that's the group that really worked all of these initiatives for us. Albany State University, Georgia Tech was involved naturally, and several of our local community partners. You know, that is one of the other big things about this project. It's designed not to just be owned and led by the city of Albany. It's really a collaborative effort, and we want everybody to be involved. The mission of this initiative, it was to improve the quality of life and health in Albany by improving food insecurity, food access, and health outcomes. By actively tracking and documenting those areas in our communities where fresh, nutritious foods are not readily available. Using that data is what we're trying to use to drive local businesses as well as national businesses to invest in our communities in certain places. And being able to provide that data to them up front makes that decision-making process a lot smoother, a lot easier, a lot quicker. Through this initiative, the partners intend to actively recruit private partners and fill the gaps identified through our research. You know, this initiative is designed to have a major quality of life impact on our community. And that again is one of the other things that this whole data hub is about, is having a major quality of life impact on not just the employees from the city, but the entire city of Albany. We also have some other things on there. We have utility data naturally. We talked about that a little bit, and I think Dr. Asensio will talk more about that. We have tax data, we have crime data, all of those things that impact housing, just as the food insecurity areas would impact housing, so does all these other things. So there's so many other things that drive the housing impact here in the city of Albany. And we're trying to build all of those tools into one place. So there's a one-stop shop for anybody that's looking for anything to do with housing and all of those other auxiliary things that affect housing. Finally, I'd like to say, even though we have several initiatives that's already built out on that site, we also plan to bring in our downtown area. We're, like most other cities, are trying to revitalize our downtown. And one of the tools that we're planning to use is this site to accentuate all those things that our downtown has to offer. All the businesses that are there, all the available buildings, all the available land, whatever the opportunity zones are, any kind of overlays that we need to provide to kind of help move the revitalization of our downtown area. We're putting all those things into play right now to try to make sure our downtown get to use this product just as the other opportunities have also. So with that, I will introduce to you Dr. Omar Asensio. He and his staff has been the group that, you know, one of the good things about the way we're situated is all the data that we're trying to deal with, we're not really trying to reach out and find that data. We have the data, we own the data, but we just needed some way to make this data work for us. And that's where Dr. Asensio and his team come in. They have come in really and did a yeoman's job of plowing through all the data that we threw at them and making sense of it and giving us some tools that we can use to help drive our decision-making processes. Dr. Asensio?
All right, thank you, Stephen. Very excited to be here and welcome everybody. I'm going to focus a little bit on one of our particular initiatives. So I'll talk today about what we did with all this data with respect to housing initiatives. And of course, this was the beginning of the project. And then this allowed us to understand how to use housing data as really the nucleus for us to build out and be able to link city data within Albany, and then use that to do policy analysis. So I'm Omar Asensio, assistant professor in the School of Public Policy and faculty affiliate at the Institute for Data Engineering and Science and the Machine Learning Center. So let me just get started by kind of giving some context. So, a lot of cities around the country are in this journey of deploying these kind of open data tools. And cities are increasingly sharing data for a number of different reasons. And one of the most common reason is to, a lot of data requests that the public is requesting, and with an eye towards improving, transparency in the delivery of public services. So that is sort of an important goal in terms of using data science for social good or public good. But there are a number of three key challenges that we're facing. Number one is that, regulations on the use of personal data, it's increasingly a focus. And so there are some practical limits to our ability to augment the massive city data that cities are collecting with private data sources, which may also have very meaningful information, so that if we link, public data with private data, then we can enable new capabilities that previously weren't possible. The second challenge that, of course, as Stephen already mentioned, is that a lot of the data is sitting in different information systems. So we have this structural problem that requires deeper record linkages between different types of data. And however, that can be very costly and complex. So one of the things we focus on in this project is to do that in a way that could enable analysis of housing records with different types of outcomes and different aspects of housing. And I'll get into that when we talk about the analysis. The third thing is that data collection is going to remain decentralized. I mean, it's really the city departments and the people who are broadcasting this data who will continue to broadcast it in a very decentralized way. So one of the benefits we had in terms of a partnership with ESRI in partnership with City of Albany is that we had a way at least to access data that would live in different systems. But as Stephen mentioned, Albany owns all of this data. So that was a really important thing for us to activate. So here I'm just showing, kind of the nexus of this kind of public-private academic partnership. We use several ESRI tools, and because the objective was to figure out how these local investments in housing revitalization impacted the local population, we wanted to understand whether we could aggregate these data sets and produce generalizable analysis, right? Code that we can, deploy and test out in Albany, and then use that as a way to test in other communities to do policy analysis. And of course, where all this is moving, this research and this kind of activity is moving towards being able to activate these kind of live data sources or continuously updating data sources to do near real-time policy analysis and analysis of impacts on local communities. So that's kind of where this is going. So let's get into kind of the policy case study. So here I'm showing you just a picture of our story map, which the link is down here, and I have it here for you in case anybody's interested to kind of read the story and the journey of what we had to do to digitize records that may be sitting on somebody's computer, and then linking that with live databases that can be queried and can be actionable, and we can importantly run statistical analyses. So the main research questions that were driving this project is, do federal housing assistance programs, many of which are of course locally administered, such as these community development block grants, do they effectively target low to moderate income households in program participation? And of course, one of the biggest issues is that although we're spending about $6 billion a year in revitalization efforts, it's unclear whether or not that funding is actually benefiting these LMI households. And of course, the empirical evidence from HUD and from others is showing that over time, the actual dollar spent on LMI communities has actually decreased over time. So we wanted to understand whether or not these investments had any important impact on people in terms of their economic outcomes and also sustainability outcomes. So the question is, do these housing policies locally administered within Albany, do they produce any kind of sustainability benefits in terms of energy conservation? So we linked a bunch of utility records at the property address level with a number of different sources so that we can carry out this investigation. So of course, just really quickly in terms of the background of the theory, for many decades now, we have been relying on information-based interventions as a way to get people to invest in energy efficiency. And of course, one of the big factors is that all these standalone energy efficiency policies, they tend to attract more affluent households, more highly educated households. And despite the fact that there are various incentives available for energy efficiency, they tend to have very low uptake rates. So participation rates are very low. And of course, at the same time, there's this debate, the housing debate about new federalism, and that is, should we keep investing in these types of entitlement programs where maybe the benefits are unclear or maybe hard to measure? So in this case, we're going to try to activate this kind of large scale civic and private data in order to get at this question as to the performance. What are the benefits of these types of local investments on the community? Okay, so I just going to show you here, of course, here's a diagram of all the different databases that were integrated. This was actually a massive undertaking with a lot of different people involved from Georgia Tech and from the city. Of course, here's a picture of us kind of live in action. We had something like 14 million records that we had to clean up, parse, handle, compute, transfer, copy, validate. And so that was quite a large task. And the main thing in the center I'm going to show you is that, of course, we're linking a lot of these different data sources, whether it be housing program data from the community, from the CED group, or from the county tax assessor's website, or from the census, or from private real estate data that's available through these private apps. And of course, other publicly available data sources. So the key thing is that we're linking these things at the property address level. And that is certainly a finer resolution than typical policy studies that may do things at a more regional scale or even at the parcel level. Okay, so the main challenge for evaluation is that properties receiving these funds generally have lower property values, right? They're not like a random draw from the population. Secondly, they're generally smaller units, so they're smaller homes, and that makes sense, of course, given the income qualified profiles. And then they have higher baseline energy use. So it means that if we do any kind of standard dashboard analytics where you're saying, okay, here are the trends of energy use over time by group, we would definitely have a biased estimates of the program impacts, because we're not really taking into account this observational bias due to the self-selection issue. So we deployed a bunch of different algorithms, and we showed that using kind of the latest, one of the latest kind of approaches, we were able to reduce observational bias over 90%. And of course, now, this thing about the uses of AI and machine learning, the cat's out of the bag in terms of understanding the importance of reducing algorithmic bias. And here we're just showing you that we took this, into consideration, and we developed these tools to be able to reduce bias. All right, so let me just kind of get to the intuition. So here are the quantitative results. So overall, we have, over 15 years of data, so we can see long run trends. And what I'm showing you here is that across all of the HUD-funded programs administered locally in Albany, we have pretty consistent treatment effect estimates of about 5% savings overall for all participants. So then we dig deeper and say, okay, well, how are these programs working on an individual basis? So we looked at two of the most popular programs, the CDBG program, which is the Community Development Block Grants, and the home funded programs. And we just see remarkable results. So contrast the story of standalone energy efficiency policies targeting higher income individuals and having very low participation rates. It's unclear what the performance is. Here we show that CDBG projects generate for residents 10% savings in their energy bills. This is over a long run, 15 years. And in energy efficiency product, 12%. Rental rehab, these are renters who rent from city-owned properties. They generated 32% savings in their energy bills using this strategy. And this is quite remarkable once we consider that there are these known split incentives that, of course, the landowners, the property owners are the ones that have to make these capital upgrades to improve the capital upgrades to existing properties, but it's the renters who actually benefit. So there's this kind of split incentive. It's one of these structural problems, the longstanding problems that we kind of address here using housing policies as kind of the innovation. All right. So in terms of program targeting, here I'm showing you a map of Albany by different wards. And what I'm showing you here is the darker colors, the blue and purple colors, is where you have higher energy consumption. And you can see that at the same time, there are higher poverty rates in that grid. So what I'm showing you in the black dots is the location of households who have been treated with these programs. And the story here is that not only do these programs generate strong savings, but they target the most needy households who have the highest energy burdens. And of course, City of Albany does have some of the highest energy burdens across the US. And so, here it's kind of making a big difference. So we wanted to translate these numbers just to kind of make it relatable. So if we take our kind of confidence intervals, on the low end, 5% savings is about $75 when annualized, and that's worth about 30% of a month's worth of groceries. On the upper end, for the residents who save up to 32%, that savings translates to about $482 per year, which is worth up to 2 months worth of groceries using the Bureau of Labor Statistics CPI index. So these are very significant numbers, and these are benefits from these housing policies that really go unquantified and unnoticed because we just haven't had the data infrastructure to be able to see these significant impacts. So let me just take a couple of minutes to kind of, we used the ESRI tools to do some surveys and semi-structured interviews. And I just wanted to give a few highlights of kind of what we learned. Of course, there seems to be a very strong commitment for the city. So we see energy use and disproportionate percentages of income are being spent on energy for people in poverty. But how do you fix that? That's the big debate. So one resident says, you're talking about saving money and putting that money toward buying food and groceries versus paying utility bills. So the housing programs can have a big impact. And another resident says, I only get $1,200 a month and my utilities is almost $500 and my mortgage is $765. So how am I supposed to live? Right. So this, we understood that, these, at the margin, these kinds of programs are really making a big impact on those communities that have participated. So just in closing, I'll leave you with the intuition that housing and investment policies in Albany is really leading the way and generating economically significant spillover benefits for energy efficiency to private residents. And these benefits have been largely hidden due to these complex data challenges. And just to contrast again, using housing eligibility criteria as an innovation for participation, I mean, we learned that there are waiting lists of people who are signed up for, demand greatly exceeds the supply of available funds. And that's in huge contrast to our more conventional utility funded energy efficiency programs, where despite a bunch of marketing dollars that get people to participate, it's very hard to get people to buy into EE programs. And, these 5 to 32% savings particularly go to those who face strong structural barriers. So I'll leave it there. Of course, this work we've made our protocols available for other cities to use via the ArcGIS Hub. And of course, we also put our protocols on code repositories. And the idea is that we want to be able to make these tools available to other communities. So if there's an interest, please do get in touch with us. We are, of course, now working with other communities in Georgia to deploy these similar types of solutions, namely in the city of Savannah and also with the city of Peachtree Corners. So with that, there's a lot of people I'd love to thank who were involved in this project, and very excited to be here. Thank you for joining. And now I'll just introduce my colleague, Chris Ladantek, who is going to talk to you about one of our other initiatives catalyzing this project related to food. And take it away, Chris.
Great. Let's see, let me get my screen up. Okay, I'm hoping that you all see some slides. I'll just take silence as
Yes,
the
we can
case is
see.
fine. So, hi everyone, my name is Chris Ladontek. I'm faculty in the School of Interactive Computing and the School of Literature, Media, and Communication. And I wanted to kind of build on the work that we've been talking about. So my area of research is something I call digital civics, which is kind of sits at the intersection of smart cities and digital democracy. Really looking at the way in which kind of data, sensing, and the kind of tools of the smart city get used by different groups within a city to advocate for the things that they care about. And so, as Omar was talking about, taking kind of city data and other private data sources to analyze kind of policy at city scale, I'm looking at kind of the other side of it, whereas how do different community groups mobilize data to advocate for the things that they care about and make different kinds of issues that are affecting them on a day-to-day basis more visible and actionable within the city. And so the food initiative that we had really sits at this juncture. It takes as a basis kind of the city and open data that was already present, the city of Albany had available and were willing to work with us. But it adds to that a layer of community generated data to really gain insight into the experiences of food insecurity within Albany. And this ultimately generates a kind of civic collaboration between a group of nonprofits and concerned businesses that are trying to address food access or were trying to address food access at the time, as well as a way to interface and interact with local government officials to make it clear where the issue is most acute and what different kinds of interventions might look like to help address issues of food access in Albany. So to back up a little bit, the larger picture is that we know that there's a set of kind of conditions that we often call a food desert, where based on how far you are from a food source, whether that's a grocery store or a bodega, whatever the case may be, that's a way to indicate whether or not you are food insecure. The challenge, of course, when we move out of really dense urban areas is that the granularity of that kind of assessment becomes very large. And so the federal data on food deserts for Albany, essentially we're sitting at the county level. And so there was no insight into where the kind of particularities of food access were being a challenge in the city. On the other hand, the local residents understand very clearly what's going on in their neighborhood and how do they get access to food and what kind of access do they have. And so this became the basis for the projects that we ran. And what we did is, and again, kind of building on top of the tool suite that ESRI provides, we built a survey platform and then brought in a number of students from Albany State University. And this project was really run in collaboration with the city, with Albany State, and with a handful of organizations working on the ground to address food security. And the idea was to say, well, if we take the kind of citywide scope of, a big chunk of the area is considered a food desert, let's get down to the kind of neighborhood by neighborhood, street by street level of understanding, not just food access as a kind of binary yes or no, but what kind of food access, what kind of food is available, what is the relative price of that food, and really begin to take a census across the city of what's there and how do we understand it. And so building on top of the ESRI tool suite, we put this survey together and then had a large workshop like almost moments before the pandemic closed everything down, where we sent a group of students across the city to begin the census taking process. It took a little bit longer than initially scoped, but over the course of the year 2020 and into 21, we were able to get the census taken across all of this food stores that were in the city of Albany. And the initial data set of where do we go to get this information came from the city and the ability to see, okay, here's where food stores are. And this was everything from grocery stores to gas stations to neighborhood bodegas, kind of really the range. And people went in, looked at what was available. Were there fresh fruits and vegetables? Was it only packaged food? Was there bread? What kind of bread? And then what were the prices of these staples? so that what we could look at is not just, oh, you can walk down the block and get food, but if you do that, you're going to pay 3 times what you would pay if you had gone to Walmart or to the grocery store. And this gives us a much more in-depth view of what the food access situation looks like within the city. This then becomes a platform. So as we also use the kind of story map facility that Omar talked about, and produced a series of maps online that helped explain and peel back where food access was an issue, but also linked it with different demographic characteristics of the city. So based on age of the kind of population within a neighborhood, or access to transportation, right, and as well as household income and the socioeconomic indicators that we are always interested in. And so we begin to see that, there are places where we know that food access is an issue. This becomes a way, in visualizing it, to do 2 things. One is for the nonprofits that were working with us on the project directly, it gave them a tool to see where they could provide more focused efforts to go in and intervene and address food access in neighborhoods that might not have been immediately on their radar. It also became a tool for communicating the issue and the scope and the breadth of the issue to local leadership. And so one of the things that came out of this at the end of the project, or towards the end of the project, was a set of presentations that were made to the city council that used the data that we were able to generate, right? And I think the interesting thing here is that it helps communicate not just that there is a problem, but that the details and the kind of richness that come out of showing this are really an important part of being able to make a convincing case and bring people along to think through creative solutions to address something like food access. I think I'm going to leave it there for now. I think there's better ways to talk about this through a series of questions, but the same kind of considerations that Omar had, we had, as well as how do we build out these tools in a way that are replicable and relevant to cities and to locations beyond just Albany, right? And beyond just the specific needs of, say, a food access kind of survey, like what are the other kinds of social considerations that we might use? This combination of crowdsourced data where the neighborhood really goes and generates the data that helps them explain what they care about and what their experience is, with the kind of formal data that cities have that enable linking between these experiences on the one hand, and kind of the specific details of how the city is operating on the other. I'll leave it there and kind of pass the mic over to Andrew and Jay from ESRI.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Omar. Thanks, everyone. So I want to share a little bit about some of our work. We've heard about the amazing research and the work being done in Albany, but I also want to share a little bit about the approaches that we think about, we take as ESRI. And my colleague Jay will then dive into some of the specific capabilities that were used for Albany and also used across the region that might be worth inspiring or even reusable by yourselves and your colleagues. So first, ESRI is a startup company that's been around for about 50 years. We work across the globe. We have over 10 million users that work in every level of government, nonprofit agencies, international organizations, and so on. So we're very fortunate to work globally, but then see the local impact, addressing key issues like we've talked about with housing and food insecurity, flooding, and other issues that affect the globe. So one of the key ways we look at this, the lenses we use is geographic information and this space and relationship between things, about how they might help us understand complex issues. How do we address resiliency in the face of change and upheaval? How do we achieve equity and access to common resources and housing and so on? Other ways to also ensure that we grow and are sustainably, and we do this efficiently. So we think a lot about how these things all come together with technology, with processes to be most effective and ultimately to collaborate together. We think about data coming from a lot of different places. You've seen some of these with coming from federal data and grant information, from utilities data, coming from statistical data, now increasingly mobile phone data, social media data, visualization data, and so on. And all these amazing different sources that come online every day and are becoming more and more real time, but integrating them together, again, using geography as a lens to pull them together, but then applying other techniques for visualization or analysis, statistically, spatial, even natural language processing and others. And then really sharing those out, communicating those through tools like story maps, through things like dashboards and applications, making sure that data gets in the hands of decision makers, in the hands of stakeholders, people who will be affected by this, so they can, one, be aware of what all this means to them, but also have a voice and give feedback on what data are missing, what are the nuances of what a policy impact might have to them. So really we can come to the best solutions together. And so we provide a lot of different tools that are easy to use, that are point and click. You can drag and drop, low code, or even get really deep and do some deep complex analysis that you've seen here, and actually share those collaboratively with each other. So really simple ways to build these dashboards for sharing with decision makers and executives, but also immersive 3D visualizations, literally as you're navigating through buildings, through cities, through parks, and so on, and having different people approach the information with the tools they're most comfortable with. So you've probably seen and worked with a lot of these different types of data and different uses. So most commonly you see these as used for land use data, both historic and as well as planning ahead, seeing these through immersive 3D and 4D visualizations, seeing the city as it might be in the future and being able to walk through that and see things like occlusion of sun and sight lines and access, and even aesthetics of this. Urban planning and sharing out these different scenarios over 20 and 30-year long-range plans, but bringing that into people's hands today to play with those. Understanding even behind the scenes infrastructure, whether that's things like buried pipelines, whether that's roads, smart city assets, and so on, making sure those all integrate together. And increasingly renewable energy, understanding where you might install things like wind turbines, solar panels, geothermal wells, and how that might support your energy production needs. And then we work a lot of things in public safety and disaster response, things where moments matter for lives and infrastructure. So being able to collaborate around these real-time data sources to understand impacts, road closures, evacuation zones, and then share that back out to responders, to support organizations, and also to residents. So specifically what we're talking about here, and what we've seen to be a really effective approach is all of this data that currently exists within organizations, in different departments, within different stakeholders, different research organizations, is first ensuring all this data can come together and be accessible across to other colleagues, so organizational-wide collaboration. So making sure that when people go and search for data around demographics and statistics or energy usage, they can find that data at their fingertips so they can go about their job determining policy or making decisions. But then what's really amazing, what we're seeing as a revolutionary approach, is to now make this data and information publicly accessible, appropriately through security measures, but also making sure that anybody can easily access that information to answer their own personal questions. What's going on in my neighborhood or with my community? Being able to possibly drill into that and utilize it for their own understanding, their own advocacy, for research, as we've talked about here, because the opportunity is huge to actually have a bigger resource center about people collaborating together with all of their intelligence together around these common problems, leveraging authoritative real-time data, spatial analysis, and being able to share those results with each other to communicate them. So we'll talk for a moment about some of the local examples in Albany, but I also want to encourage you to go check out some other ones that you can find around Georgia and around the world. Cobb County has done a tremendous job utilizing ArcGIS Hub to share out open data, simple, easy to use tools as well to dive into parcel information, school zones, community resources, and so on. And across all of Georgia, the Georgia Department of Transportation is using this to highlight every single road project across the state. So you can dive in and understand access to the plans, to the status, to the financials, and provide your feedback as well on these things. So if you're traveling somewhere, driving somewhere, or there's some road change happening, you can actually utilize these tools in GIS to understand what's going on near you, but also engage and give feedback so it's as effective as possible. And other things like even keeping Georgia clean. So using ArcGIS and geospatial technology to clean up the litter around neighborhoods and cities across the state. So I want to hand it off to my colleague, Jay, who's going to dive into some of the work that's been occurred utilizing these tools in Albany.
Thank you, Andrew. So I think we've already kind of seen some of these, which is exciting. The work that Dr. Asensio and Dr. Lodantic did was really incredible in their teams and the collaboration of the city. But I really wanted to speak to how geospatial intelligence was applied to the different projects that we've heard about. As I mentioned, the number of different tools were used across these projects, including ArcGIS Hub, which is the tool that Andrew and I work on. But to just reinforce what Andrew was saying, ArcGIS Hub aims to take GIS work that's going on within an organization and help make it visible and accessible to the broader community. And this is done not just by providing clear and easy to find information, but also by providing community volunteers access to tools and data that staff members are using as well, so that they can be equal collaborators in the effort. As we've heard, members of the community were key stakeholders in the work that was done in Albany. And they participated in and helped inform the initiatives that the city, the Food Security Advisory Committee, and Georgia Tech, among other partners, were focused on. ESRI and the ArcGIS Hub team were excited. We were excited to be a partner in these efforts to see how our tools could be used to support this kind of partnership between local government, civic organizations, public universities, etc. So I wanted to, like I said, highlight some of the ways the tools were used to extend learnings from these projects to broader audiences. As Omar mentioned, he and his team did extraordinary work combining enormous amounts of local data from a number of different sources to conduct our analysis. But we worked with Omar and his team to translate their analysis into a Python notebook, which could be publicly shared and reused by others. I know they had also done the analysis in R. But I think what was really exciting is within our ecosystem, this workflow leverages not only hosted Python notebooks, but many pre-processed data sets available through ESRI's Living Atlas. So when a new community wants to get involved and try and take on this analysis, they can start with national data sets that already exist and augment that with what they have available locally. We already heard a little bit about the story map that they worked on, and I really encourage you all to check it out. I thought we were really inspired by how well the story map explains not only the intention and utilization of HUD grants for a lay audience, but how it really provides opportunities for community members to explore their own neighborhoods. It really localized the data and the analysis to something that was more legible to individuals. And as part of their mixed methods approach to understand grant utilization in Albany, the team created a hub site to sign up volunteers to participate in virtual interviews during the COVID lockdown. And they did this in coordination with traditional outreach techniques like newspapers and radio ads and postcards, among others. But I think what's really exciting here is it provides a virtual connection that can help augment what we're already used to in terms of getting people in and getting people involved. The other research team, as Chris kind of mentioned, took a more grassroots approach to identify initiatives relevant to the city. And what we're seeing here is in fall 2019, Chris and one of the other collaborators on the project, Amanda Meng, conducted interviews across community groups and facilitated a workshop with city staff to identify the high priority issues in the city. And there were a number of different things that I think we came across that felt important. Food security was just one of them. But this process, I think, really helped elevate goals, potential collaborators and affected communities, and data needs that could support this effort. We heard a little bit about this wonderful community mapping project. And as I think Chris already mentioned, they were able to translate an existing survey into our Survey 123 tool. This allowed the team to organize the event and bring in outside partners at Albany State University. They were able to privately share a survey with a large group of volunteers consisting of staff, faculty, students from Albany State, representatives from the city, other interested community members. And they were able to do that privately using Hub community identities, which brings in community members and allows them to be brought further and further in to the process as they volunteer more. Volunteers were able to download the survey onto their phones or use paper forms to collect information around in stores around the city. But I think what was really interesting, one of the details that I loved was that we wanted to effectively deploy volunteers. And so the Georgia State Tech team worked with the city to spatially cluster locations of grocers, markets, convenience stores, chain stores, gas stations, other businesses that were selling food into smaller sets so that volunteers could be assigned, pairs of volunteers could be assigned to different parts of the city effectively, so we could cover as much as we could in an afternoon. And we got quite a ways through that, even if it took a couple more bites at the apple to get the full inventory. From there, as Chris kind of mentioned, they also had a story mapping effort. I think what was really incredible here is this hub site was the work of an entire food security advisory council, and it shows not only the story maps that contextualize the work that they were doing, but also provides access to raw data. So they were able to give the data back to the people who helped create it. I think they've done a great job being able to frame the current state of food security and health outcomes and elevate community efforts to expand access as this effort continues to roll. We're excited. I'll kind of conclude by talking through how we're excited to expand out this learning in a few different ways from our side. We've documented and shared resources for Hub users around the country and around the world in the form of strategic guides. And I'll give you an example of the activity that Chris and Amanda ran with the city. I think is a great candidate to help users break down silos and collaborate with colleagues to identify what initiatives their organization should undertake first. It's really great that we're able to take these tools and share these resources even further. We've published a number of reusable templates to help users get a head start on the work that they're doing. And we aim to embed validated practices from the field into those templates. It's not just a pretty website, it's all of the things that go underneath it that help provide deeper understanding and engagement efficacy. There are a number of tools created in these efforts that could be templated. I've already mentioned the Housing Utilities Analysis Notebook, the Food Access Mapping Survey, but I wanted to point out the data inventory survey that was developed and administered in Albany initially, which is now featured in our Share Open Data template, which is one of our most used templates to help cities when they first get started to understand what do we have here and who are champions that I could find from other parts of the city, which I think was a real benefit to what the folks in Albany, the city and the research teams were able to do. Finally, we've been able to collect some deep insights from Georgia Tech and the City of Albany teams to inform enhancements of the tool itself to make it easier to use. Some of the things that we've been thinking about recently, informed by this work, is how to provide community members a more seamless experience to come on in, create an account in the city's hub, and be consistent and long-term collaborators. We're thinking about allowing project managers to an easier way to communicate their work with less time spent futzing in HTML or CSS, or even in site layouts, and may really get to manage and know who their volunteers are so that they can engage with them more effectively. And finally, we're helping collaborators work together on data and tools like the spatial clustering that we were talking about, or cleaning up data that's shared across stakeholders, do things like internal and external discussions. So I hope that gives you kind of an overview of some of the things that I think we were able to see from the technology side that was really incredible about this kind of multi-stakeholder partnership, and how we're really hoping to take the learnings that came up through this and help expand it out to as many municipalities, localities as we can.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Chris, Omar, Andrew, and Stephen. Feel free to put your screens back on so we can have a panel discussion. Let me start with Stephen first. Obviously, you spoke really well at the beginning of the burden and, of course, the luxury you have by owning and having lots of data. And of course, through the help of Andrew and Omar and Chris and Jay, you've kind of been able to utilize a lot of that data and develop the tool sets that you need in order to improve decision making. At this point in time, can you kind of share with us how you've been able to continue to institutionalize that data into your decision making, and if any, provide any examples of how that has changed or improved some of your operations?
Well, first of all, let me reiterate that although I'm the face you see on the camera, I'm by no means the ones that's doing the work to make this thing happen. I have a great team of people that's working with me. Matter of fact, we have this group called the Emerging Technologies Team. It's a collaboration of different groups around the city, different departments in the city. They're the ones that put all this stuff together. They're the ones that really make it work. They're the ones that collaborate with all these guys and pull these things together, then allow me to go and be the front face of it. So I can't say enough about the work that they've done through this also. But as a result of that, now we have a robust set of data that we can go to for many different things, especially like that food insecurity. That was some really great community work, which really got a lot of people involved that would normally never talk to each other. But in a real good situation, they all came together, they all worked hard, and being able to get individual people involved that, that they're not like leaders in the community, that they're just concerned citizens and they wanted to help. Being able to just, use the tool that they already had in their hands, something that they were already familiar with, that didn't have to learn anything new. So that was a great experience for us. And we've used that. Matter of fact, we have a store whose kickoff, a grand opening was this month as a result of that food insecurity initiative. So it really did exactly what it was designed to do.
Nice. That is a very concrete example of putting up a store in order to tackle food insecurity and food deserts, as Chris has articulated. So Andrew, let me turn to you. Obviously, we talk a lot about public-private partnerships and the need for, trying to put together private sector with the community or public sector, and of course, research. And no one disagrees on, that we should do more of it. And obviously, this Albany project is a really good example of that coming together and happening. But can you kind of tell us from your perspective, like, why should we do it, and how is it actually done in terms of the mechanics? I mean, we agree that it should be done, but how is it actually done in practice?
Yeah, so as a technology company, it's very easy for us to sit at whiteboards and come up with amazing ideas and go and build technology and deliver it to the world. And that's fun and rewarding, but it's really hard to know what change you've made. Working with a city like Albany and Stephen and his team to really understand what's life like every day. What other distractions do you have? What tools are you familiar with? What's the cost of learning something? What are you really trying to communicate, and how communicate that really situates the work, what we're trying to build, to be most effective as possible. And then partnering up with a research organization like Georgia Tech allows us to have a little bit of a distance on, and honestly, the criticism and the positive sides of things, see the things that we don't see through applying strict methodologies, different processes, obviously the brilliance and intelligence of professors and staff and students to really understand what's going on, share with us those insights, apply the tools, whether they're hands-on or guiding the city staff on those things. So really the three things coming together of us as builders, the city as and the municipalities as the actual the doers and the actuators of it, and the research organizations to give us and really bind these things together is really tremendous for us to make sure that we've learned it, we've closed that feedback loop, and we should be doing it again because we've learned a lot. As Jay mentioned, we're going to start applying those, but we want to measure the efficacy of those tools, or what else are we missing in the future? Obviously, as the world and expectations change. So for us, it was just really thinking about, who's an organization who's, Honest has amazing leadership, like Stephen and his team, who's willing to, try out something, to put their neck a little bit more out there and put their face on this and saying, hey, we're willing to work different. And that was something that Stephen talked about very early on that. And willing to partner up and saying, we want you to be involved in this, because we all know it can be messy, but if we're willing to admit it's messy and share that process and share it out broadly. And then partnering up with a research organization like Georgia Tech to understand, okay, what are the key questions that you're all thinking around? What are the things you find motivating? And how can we actually learn from that to apply and improve our work? So again, a lot of pieces there to all come together that obviously we found to be really effective here, and we're still looking forward to doing it more.
Nice. And just quickly as a final question for Omar and Chris, obviously you are the researchers and have dealt with both your respective methodologies, tons of publicly available and also community-driven data. How did you account for obviously data securities and privacy from the millions and millions of data sets that you had to account for?
I guess I can start, and then maybe Chris, you can take that one. So great question, important question, very current question, because we deal with these issues on a daily basis. But actually, I want to defer the question to Stephen because he initially gave us our initial guidance. I mean, certainly Stephen, as a CIO at the time for Albany, represented all the data custody for the city. So what was an important organizational and bureaucratic structure in Albany, which catalyzed a lot of this innovation, was that Stephen held this kind of, centralized role for data custody within the city. And he also had this dual role that was, at the city level, but also he had the county at the county scale as well. That turns out to be one of the critical elements in terms of having leadership in the city, that it makes it easier to say, well, look, I need tax data and give me your transit data, and I want those two things to connect together. Well, having some leadership in place like Stephen's was really critical to make that happen. And with respect to personal data protections and everything, certainly this is something that the academic partnership is important, because any sort of research output that we would do is going to be subject to kind of IRB protocols. So that's one level of protection. And then, of course, as Stephen famously mentioned one day, is, well, any data you're touching is subject to open records request. So if it's subject to an open records request, then certainly that defines kind of the data boundary. So with that, I'll just kind of turn it over to Chris, and thank you for the question.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, working on the food security part, the platform itself did a lot of that work. So I think oftentimes in kind of a community setting, community organization setting, the tools that are getting used are kind of cobbled together from, whether it's things on the Google platform or other open tools that don't have the kind of capabilities built in to really manage and think seriously through the consequences of data security and data privacy. By working within the ESRI environment, kind of someone else was already kind of thinking about and managing that, right? And some of that was Stephen's team, some of that was kind of the other data sets that we were pulling in. And so those questions that are often not present, or at least kind of front of mind for community organizations who are really focused on kind of the issues that are front and center for them, just kind of got magically taken care of. There's of course some, there's some friction there, because oftentimes how do you manage a fluid environment where you have different volunteers coming and going who need access to different things? That becomes a trickier scenario when there are rules around how do you share data. But I think it's important to recognize that certainly in an environment where we have to think carefully about data access and privacy and security, having tools that have that built in as a baseline then lets us figure out how do we do that in a way that is as accessible and flexible as possible, given the different kinds of roles that people might have on a project.
Well, thank you, Omar, Chris, Stephen, Andrew, and Jay. Definitely, this webinar is recorded, so if folks want to come back to this or miss certain parts of it, you can see it. Stay tuned for our next Smarter Together webinar around smart community core that Christy will lead next month. But until then, thank you all for joining us, and take care.